All right. Well, maybe Olivier will join, maybe not. But we should probably get started. Yeah.
Sure.
So I'll kick us off just because I have the top two um, items in the agenda for this week. Uh, Fortunately, I can be brief because most of my thoughts are actually written down, which is atypical, as you all well know. Um, the first of which is MP1 design. I'm considering it ready for review. I obviously still reserve the right to make changes. I mean, that's kind of the point in making it ready for review, so others can provide comments and I can amend as required. But at this point, I think the big bases are covered. I will add a few caveats here, and I mentioned this in the document. And by the way, if you want to see the design for the new Antidote platform, you can take a peek at the forum post, and there's links, all kinds of stuff there. So take a look at Antidote platform project management, MP1 syringe redesign, and for to be exhaustive, I'll also post a link in the chat. So please, yeah, as I mentioned, please, if you do want to leave comments, it's best if you're actually talking about a particular piece of it, then you actually comment in the pull request on the line that you're talking about. That helps, I think, keep things clean. Of course, if you're just leaving general comments, then regular comments on the main PR, the conversation tab is fine. But if there is, I ask if there is context that you keep that in place. It helps not only me but also everybody that comes after. That wants to take a peek at it. There was another thing I wanted to say. Well, of course, there's all the architectural changes, but one of the things I wanted to sort of reinforce is the name. I think I mentioned this last week, but it might have been in passing. I'm going to get rid of the name syringe. I love the name. I think it's been pretty fun to talk about. But we still have used Antidote as the name of the platform when we talk about it generally. So we're in this situation now where we're sort of like competing with ourselves from a terminology perspective, and it's just confusing. So we're getting rid of the name syringe. What we'll do is we'll call the microservices that will be created as part of MP1. We'll refer to that as effectively Antidote Core, and we'll name the repository accordingly. And then each of the services will get their own name. So like the API will actually be called like Antidote-API, and we'll actually compile a binary that's called that. Same thing with the scheduler, same thing with all the other different services that are in the design. So I say that mostly just because I think everybody is sort of accustomed to thinking about syringe as like the backend component that they think about. And that's obviously that architecture is going to stay the same, or at least that paradigm is going to stay the same. The actual way that it works architecturally will not, but there will still be a component that we refer to as sort of the platform backend. It's just that instead of being called syringe, we're just going to call the whole thing Antidote. So Antidote Web will be a service of many, and I think that'll do a lot for us in terms of explaining the platform, because we won't have to hedge the conversation and be like, well, we've got this thing called syringe, but it's technically part of Antidote, and you know what I mean. It's very confusing. So there's a lot. I mean, that's one aspect of the design that I laid out in that doc. The rest is dives into specific design domains that focus on, say, like the new design for the API, the new design for like how these microservices will communicate, and all kinds of stuff like that. So take a peek at that. I will say that there are, to reach the point with this doc that I did, it required a decent amount of prototyping.
Sorry, hold on one second.
Oh, sure. So the prototyping that I did, I tried to answer as many questions as possible, but sometimes it wasn't possible. Sometimes there were just things that if I actually built, enough of a prototype to actually answer the question in my own mind, it would be effectively just implementing it. And in those cases, I elected to just not answer those questions. And if there are unanswered questions, I placed them within the specific milestones at the bottom of the doc. So you'll notice that there's a second section on the doc that says, here are the actual tasks that not very small tasks. They're still pretty big tasks, like implement the database package. That's going to take probably a week or two of work. But if there are unanswered questions where I'm like, look, we're not going to be able to figure this out until we actually get into the thick of it, then I tried to articulate that there as well. So take a peek. If you have questions, let me know. Fortunately, there's a few other things that I have on my plate, so I'm not going to actually jump into doing the work for at least a few weeks or maybe a week if I can help it. But note that I think that this work is long overdue. So I think it is important that we at least get on with the very first steps in the design. So your feedback, would be greatly appreciated in that process. And I know that this is Thanksgiving week, so I'm not talking about this week. I'm talking about next week at the very earliest. Cool. So that's that. I'll leave it there because, like I said, the document is much longer than I care to cover on this call. The next thing that I want to cover is if you look at the agenda, one other topic that's actually come up before in calls like this, as well as forum posts by Olivier and a few other folks. Guacamole. So if you're not aware, Guacamole is basically the project that we're using to accomplish a lot of the sort of core functionality within Antidote Web. It's at its core, it's a remote access technology, meaning you can implement it. In fact, it's an Apache project, and it actually comes with like an installable app where you can install it on your system and then use it as effectively like a web-based terminal services like application where you can give users, and it's totally turnkey. Like you could give users access to, RDP to this system or VNC to that system or SSH to another. You know what I mean? It's just sort of like a turnkey thing. What we did initially to make the terminal work in the browser for NRA Labs is we didn't use that turnkey application, but we did use a lot of the different components that went into it. So the JavaScript front end library, the back end proxy, we call it guacd, or they call it guacd, which is a sort of a proxy between HTTP and SSH. So anyway, for the longest time, we've actually had quite a few struggles with Guacamole. And I won't belabor the point here because, like I said, I wrote a doc that covers it, and I just posted a second link in the chat to the forum post that I posted yesterday, which contains a little bit of explanation and then a link to a proposal doc that talks about replacing Guacamole. So in that doc, you'll see some of the problems that we've been dealing with for the past few months at least. But then I think that if we're being honest, it's been for at least the last year. And basically a proposal for replacing it. So the big thing here is why are we doing this? There's a few reasons. One of which is Guacamole's performance is actually pretty bad, and we currently, like the way that the project has been run in the past year, and the way the capabilities that we've had hasn't really made it that big of a deal. Meaning we've been able to mask the performance problems. So as an example, we don't support mobile. And so as on average, most folks that use NRE Labs won't notice that the fact that the performance of Guacamole is actually pretty terrible, because on if you're using a PC, there's a good chance that your internet connection is a lot better than what you would get on your phone. You might ask, why don't we support mobile? Well, that's actually Guacamole's fault too. So performance aside, which by the way, that's already a deal breaker. And we've actually done demos of using Guacamole over a mobile connection, and it's pretty bad. But in addition to that, it actually doesn't even work. And the reason for that is the way that the input is registered on mobile browsers. If you click inside the Guacamole terminal, there's no way to prompt for a text box or a keyboard to pop up, because it's not recognized as an input. So that's a problem. A problem that we could sort of overcome through some neat little hacks, but we don't want to go down that route. You might also know that we're actually engaged with a consulting company to do a lot of the heavy lifting for Antidote Web. So to sort of bring it from what it was, which is really proof of concept code that I wrote, into the modern web design sort of era. And that really prompted us to reconsider Guacamole. So all of the concerns that we've already had, they've brought up a few others. There's also the accessibility angle. So Guacamole is not written in a way that can allow us to really finish the accessibility redesign of the site. which is tough. There's a whole bunch of other reasons that are in the doc. So suffice it to say, for us, I think there are it's not just a handful; it's like several compelling reasons to move away from guacamole. And so the question is, how do we do it, and how do we replace what we've got? And that's basically why I created the doc, because I think there's a pretty good way to replace what we've got through a few different projects. The terminal replacement, I think, is the most non is I think the easiest pill to swallow, because the idea for the replacement is Xterm JS, which is actually orders of magnitude more popular than guacamole anyway. So I think that's probably the least controversial of the decisions. However, Xterm JS doesn't come with an equivalent to guacd, which is, again, that proxy we sit in the background that allows us to effectively only open one connection out of the cluster. And this way we don't have to expose SSH to all of our network devices and other endpoints, which is good. We don't want to do that. So the doc also explains the kind of things that we could put in place to replace that. And the really good news there actually is that work's already done, because we found a project that does it, and we actually already implemented. We put up a prototype of that, and we're going to hopefully point our web development team towards that, so that they can do their development on the Xterm JS side. So really, I don't really anticipate this being a lot of work on anybody's plate. Certainly not the communities, because like I said, I think for the time being, we've got a sort of professional web development shop doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But the outcome from this, I think, is an Antidote Web that is way more aligned in every way, including the in-browser terminal, which thus far has been sort of like the last holdout of sort of bad design, effectively. After all of this work is done, what we're going to end up with is an Antidote Web that's much better aligned with what I think most open source web developers are accustomed to, and that way we can get more folks from the community engaged on that project. Versus now, which is using a project that somebody, quote me, who is not a web developer, so I got it working, but it doesn't follow any of the standards. And then there's Guacamole, which has all its issues. It's tough to attract web developers to help contribute there. So I think this is a really, really good net good for that kind of thing, attracting more folks to the platform, which is a big project or a big priority for us. So I've been talking a long time. I will pause here for questions on either point, the MP1 stuff or the idea of replacing Guacamole.
I don't have any questions. I've been tracking the MP1 redesign for a few weeks and like the coming changes. And I'm not a huge fan of guacamole due to personal reasons. So let me rephrase that. I'm a fan of the dip, not of Apache guacamole.
I see. Yeah, it's an important clarification. We were almost going to fight.
Correct.
Yeah. I honestly, like I said, I think the guacamole change in particular is actually pretty non-controversial. I think it's just been something that we haven't really been forced to change. It's been something we want to change. It's just been one of those things where it's just like, we got a lot of work to do. So do we invest in this? Do we invest in that? I think the investment that we currently have in self-medicate is well spent. So I think that makes sense. And the fact that we're currently, literally paying a web development company to take on Antidote Web and really prepare it for to basically participate in a grown-up project. I think it makes sense at this point. We've got somebody who actually spends time in that space, investing their time and expertise in it, and they're saying, look, it's time to part ways. And it turns out there's actually not that much work on our side to enable that. So I think it makes a lot of sense. On the MP1 side, I'll also highlight this kind of goes back to what we discussed on the last week's call. And I also mentioned this. Ooh, I totally forgot to bring up my third thing. It's not on the agenda. I meant to add it, but I forgot. I'll get to that in a second. you'll notice in the current architecture, there's an SYRCTL tool, which does some like lesson validation. But part of the MP1 design that I think most excited about is the addition of tooling to do anything, literally anything with lesson content, including the creation of it. So what we'll be doing is effectively moving all of the existing models for lesson definitions and everything like that into a new package, a new database package. But those Go types will actually be decorated with JSON schema data. And the really cool thing about that is we can start building really cool tooling on top of that allows us to create resources in an automated, like in a sort of an interactive wizard kind of form. And this is, by the way, I used to work at a company called Stackstorm, and this is exactly how we did it there. All of our sort of database types, while originally, basically modeled to work with, I'm blanking on the name, MongoDB. We also created JSON schema documents for everything. And what that allowed us to do was, in both the web UI for Stackstorm as well as the command line client, you could run like SD2 create pack or a rule, for instance. And what it would do is it would go into the code base and be like, okay, here's the model for a rule, and here are all the fields, and here's how long this field can be. Here, this other field is an integer, and it can be no more than 500 or something like that. And so all these bounds are put in place, and what that does is it allows us to create really nice tooling for creating stuff from scratch. Right now, the way that people create lessons is kind of cringy, to be honest. This is just because there's no other option. And you basically go into the curriculum repository and you run a CP space -R space, and then you type the name of a directory that you think looks close enough to what you want, and you copy it, and then you edit your copy, which is where it works. It's functional, but it's just like there's got to be a better way, especially as we introduce more sort of interesting features into the platform. It'd be nice if we could present all of those options to the user when they decide to create content. So I think there's many exciting parts of MP1. Obviously, as the person who's actually running operations for the site, there are other aspects to MP1 that I think are exciting, because I think they'll help actually operate the thing. But I think from a perspective of like enabling the community to continue getting back to work and overcoming some of the hurdles that we've been talking about already with self-medicate, I think introducing that new tooling is also really cool. Last thing, and I'll be very brief on this third thing because there's really not much to talk about. The main reason for that is I would like to really dive into the changes that we're planning at next week's stand-up. So I'll be brief for now. The network reliability.engineering domain is another one of those things that it's gotten us this far, but it's been a little rough because it's long and it's just been a challenge to tell people about it. It's been a challenge to put additional content on it. So that domain itself is already long enough. You start talking about adding subdomains, it's like ugh. So one of the things we discussed last week, and I mentioned that I was going to get this done by this week, and I'm not quite finished, but I'm pretty close, is new documentation for the NRE Labs curriculum itself. So right now we've got all of our documentation on the Antidote Project website, and what we have is, I'm going to share my screen real quick. And what we have is we effectively have the Antidote documentation mixed in with the NRE Labs documentation. And it's pretty confusing. So what we're going to do is we're going to play with a new form of documentation that's hosted on something called Gitbook. And if you haven't seen it, it's actually pretty cool. It's all Git backed, just like we currently have with the Antidote docs. But the look and feel is actually a lot better. It's a much more modern platform than Read the Docs is. And I think this gives us an opportunity to really simplify the documentation for NRE Labs. So this is aimed specifically, and solely at the curriculum, helping folks understand, first off, what it is and what its relationship to Antidote is. So we cover that briefly. But then really just drill specifically into, okay, so your goal is to contribute to the curriculum, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't be here. communicating your idea. This is sort of the four-step cycle that's currently on the Antidote Project docs. And I'm not done with this, by the way. This is definitely work in progress. I'm actively converting content to this platform from the old docs. Previewing locally. So this is the self-medicate instructions. This is, I think, still very much, restructured text on the back end. So that's why it's not rendering properly. And then how to contribute. Release planning will also go here. That's TBD. So basically anything to do with the curriculum, I'd like to convert entirely to this documentation site, and only that. And that way we can keep the Antidote documentation where it's at, or maybe I'll create another a Gitbook site for that. I don't know. But I think having them separate is useful. And I also want to call out the fact that I spent time thinking about how to order all of this content. So one other complaint that we get a lot with the docs is, I don't know where to find stuff. I'm trying to find it, follow it top to bottom, and it doesn't seem to be in any sort of reasonable order. I think the main reason for that is because I'm not really used to documentation being in any sort of order. I view documentation more like a reference. But I think for the curriculum, I think it's actually pretty useful to have it in an order. So you start from nothing, and then you literally go from top to bottom, and you build, and everything builds on itself from inception of like understanding what you're looking at, starting with communicating your idea, moving into actually creating the content, previewing it locally, and then contributing it back. And then how does that contribution get into a release? And then the last thing I'll touch on this, you might notice the domain is docs.nrelabs.io. Now I will say, please don't share this, because this is something we're building sort of standalone. We're not actually pointing anybody to this right now. This is sort of an inside baseball for us as active community participants to sort of talk about and and hash out. But we're not going to formally start pointing people to this to anything on this domain until we're really, really ready for it. And that's what I'm going to, I think, talk about next week, because I'm building a plan for how to effectively start using this domain as our primary domain. But it's going to take a few months for that plan to, I think, get rendered. Anyway, all of that said, what do you guys think about the new domain? Do you think it's worth considering using that new domain, nrelabs.io? Do you think that's better? Do you think it's corny? Do you think we should stay on the existing domain? Do you think moving to this kind of domain, a shorter domain, is long overdue? I'm really eager to hear your thoughts.
I was just telling someone about NRE Labs yesterday and had to spell out labs.networkreliability.engineering for them, and it was so I'm happy to see a shorter URL.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, cool. So we're obviously, nothing's final. Literally the only thing that's on this domain right now is the site you're looking at right now, and it's not even finished. So this is all very, very early days. I brought this up this week just to plant the seed. Next week, what I'll commit to is next week have a proposal for if we want to do this, then we can take action on it. I'll build a plan for, assuming we want to transition to this domain, how would we do it, and what's the order of things that we would need to do to make sure that it's done properly. So I would again ask, please don't, obviously this is, we're going to publish this recording still. But we aren't actively sending folks to this domain. So just keep it to yourself if you can. We'll just sort of treat this as like a A/B kind of deployment. And then once we're ready, if we get to this point, we'll switch folks over. But I'll cover all of the details for how that will work next week, because as you might imagine, there's quite a few things we need to do in terms of redirects. Obviously, that's like at the tail end. We got to make sure we redirect from the old domain to the new. And there's a whole bunch of work that needs to go in prior to that, because there's a few things actually I think that are coming together. It's not just a new domain, but there's also all of the changes with Antidote Web that are going to land probably in the next month or two. And I think launching all of that on a new domain makes a lot more sense than trying to figure out how to get things working in sort of like a halfway approach. So I'll leave it at there. It sounds like at least there's one support. If you have any other thoughts, let me know here. But I've been talking for a long time, and I'm trying to be sensitive to that. So I'll definitely go back to the proposal that I'm drawing up for this and put more detail there and present it next week. And that way we can all sort of understand what's on the plate.
Thank you, Matt.
Derek, did you have anything on the agenda for yourself, dude? Any updates on like the MP3 stuff? I think the only thing left on the agenda formally is just open discussion. So if anybody has any other topics too.
No, I don't. I'm working on it. I'd like to get that done, well, at least the draft done by the end of the week. Um, that's largely it. Well, that, and I guess I made some progress yesterday with getting the full version of VQFX to launch. The person got back to me and said that there was a requirement for running. So if you guys are familiar with Juniper equipment, there's most Juniper equipment. The very first, by the way, Juniper piece of equipment, the M40 router from back in 1998, separated the control plane from the routing from the forwarding plane. The control plane and the forwarding plane were actually connected by a gigabit Ethernet cable inside the chassis, which you have no control over. But the idea was they weren't on the same. There were two different motherboards that were talking to each other. They were isolated. And so all Juno's products are predicated on this notion that those two things are separate. And the QFX is no different. And the VQFX and all of our V versions of things are no different. So what happens in order for VQFX to work is you have a routing engine process that's running inside of its own virtual machine. And according to the directions, if you follow the rules, everything works fine, but we're breaking the rules. According to the directions, there's a second virtual machine. So if you're running Kimu or something like that, there are actual two VMs running that, and those two VMs together make a single VQFX. One VM is the forwarding plane and one VM is the control plane. And they talk to each other over a TCP connection on ports 3000 and 3001 by default. So what happens is we don't want to run there's no reason to run that control plane software inside of its own VM. There's no reason to run the forwarding plane software in its own VM. It's a single daemon, right? It's a single process. The routing engine is a different story. So that has to be in its own VM because it's built on FreeBSD and it's with kernel modules and everything else. It's inseparable. So we'd like to take that single process out for the forwarding plane and put it in the container, and that would make spin up times quicker, and it would make obviously we would use a lot less RAM and that kind of stuff. So the problem is that while somebody put together a hack to make that work for the VMX, it has not been working for VQFX. The CPU goes up, the process starts issuing like tens of thousands of requests a second, and the whole thing just blows up. So what I discovered, I didn't discover, what was told to me by the people who write that forwarding plane daemon. By the way, that forwarding plane daemon is called COSIM. It's a simulator, and it simulates forwarding plane hardware. People who write that simulator daemon, they have a requirement which is not published publicly that says you have to configure. There's a thing called Q-statistics. It's in the configuration hierarchy of Junos. It's not a hidden feature. It's not a hidden thing. You have to change that to a 1 second interval because by default it's 8 milliseconds, and it's not going to work. That's the bottom line. You have to change it to 1 second. So today I'm going to verify that fix is working, or if that fix does work for our purposes. That's one status. And I'd like to have MP3, the draft for MP3, inside of the repository by the end of tomorrow. That's it. So is there anyone have anything else?
I have a question. Probably Steven probably can answer this because I think he introduced this. Um, the VB Guest plugin for self-medicate, what's that do? I assume it's like it's something installing guest editions, but it's not immediately clear to me what that does. I think the comment on it or the documentation says that it's required for mounting the curriculum,
Yes.
but
So if
I'm not sure if
you,
that's still relevant.
yeah, I don't know if you disable VB Guest or don't have VB Guest installed. I believe the curriculum might default to rsync. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Hmm.
But the way that we mounted it, or without giving a type, it defaults to whatever's best for the environment you're running. And if you're running VirtualBox, then it tries to use VirtualBox built-in shared folders, which require VB Guest extensions on the guest OS.
So could we like avoid having to install that plugin by specifying another type? Or is that not a good idea? Because back to what you said, like that's not always supported on the host operating system.
Yeah, so I think if we're going the route of VirtualBox being our primary, then using something that's supported by VirtualBox would be better. With VirtualBox, you get the real-time updates. With rsync, if I remember correctly, you have to launch a reload command or some specific command in order to refresh the curriculum, aside from the command that we also have to run. And we have to run the command anyways inside the VM, which I'm hoping to have a vagrant command for that.
Neat.
And maybe we can tie it all together. I have some taking over the self-medicate. I have some ideas that I'm fleshing out right now.
Dope.
So I guess I can segue into that.
Yeah.
One question that Olivier asked or suggested was building our own vagrant images. So looking through what Robox does on the generic, which is what we use for libvirt, and I was planning on switching everything over to. They're using Packer to build the VMs. So right now I'm trying to get Packer to run on my, I'm running a Linux VM under VirtualBox 6.1, which supports the Intel, if it release candidate. Anyways, trying to get our own boxes built for Antidote, which would include Docker and Minikube already installed, which has some benefits.
Sure. And with respect to that, I mean, I would love to get to the point. I mean, I think we currently tag the repo. I can't remember. I'd have to look back at the release workflows. But I'm fairly confident that what we do when we update the when we release the curriculum, I think, because self-medicate's technically a curriculum resource, really. Like it's not meant to be used for like platform development, so it's meant to be used as like a curriculum resource. So I think releasing self-medicate alongside the curriculum makes sense, and we should, if we're not, like I said, I got to go back to the workflows and try to remember this, but if we're not already doing this, we should try to get to the point where we release, we actually release versions of self-medicate, and then in the documentation we would point people to downloading one of those stable releases. So that way we get to a point of stability and we perform a release. And that way we can make changes a little more liberally without worrying about breaking the experience for folks. And then once we get to that point, if we do build a box, which I there's merit to the idea. I think we should get to the point where we are also automatically building that as part of the release process. So like, basically the full end-to-end setup, you're already using Packer. So it sounds like you're on the right path. So basically deploying all of
Right.
that into a repo, and then as part of the curriculum workflow, the curriculum release workflow, we can automatically build that image too and publish it.
That's the idea. That's
Sweet.
the idea.
Cool.
And we also pushed a change for supporting local images for Docker. That was because of Olivier's request for pre-downloading the images instead of having a way to either have a box with the images built in or a way to load the images before it tries to do a Docker pull due to slowness of Docker.
Yeah.
I think Docker started throttling me because I was rebuilding the Vagrant machine so much and testing parts of it that now it takes me an hour and a half on a 400 meg connection to run all the VQFX containers.
That's not good. Well, a few things there. I left a comment on that on the original issue you're talking about.
Yes.
I think
I saw that.
the Derek's work in MP3 is definitely going to cut down on image size, so that will be, I think, less of an issue. I would also say if we're actually, I obviously if we're actively working on self-medicate, then the use case is a little different because we're going to want to rebuild frequently. So this doesn't really help that. But in general, if we find that there is a use case for users to frequently rebuild their Vagrant environments, it's probably good to just fix that issue. On top of that, if we start back to the last point you made, if we do end up making an image for self-medicate that has the Docker images baked in, does that make this not necessary anymore?
Correct. So when we go to smaller images, that's less of an issue. I noticed two things yesterday in my testing. One, our box size, if we pre-bake the images into the box size would be rather large. So it's either downloading one large box or downloading one large Docker image. The other that I noticed is the utility VM gets rebuilt nightly. And therefore the security patches go in nightly. So you're still having to do a Docker pull and pulling multiple parts of that image anyways, every night.
Well, that shouldn't be the case because what we do is when you release the curriculum, when we release a new version of the curriculum, what we do is we actually build all of those images and tag them, and that never changes.
Okay.
And
So
in
we must have done a
self-medicate,
curriculum release last night then, or 2 nights ago.
no. What's more, we didn't. What's probably more likely is there's a configuration problem on the syringe manifest for self-medicate, because what you do in syringe is you say, look, I'm using this version of the curriculum, and I think the current one's 1.0.0, and so what that's going to do is as it looks for, I know what's probably happening. It's not the syringe manifest, it's the actual Docker pull step, which that's probably it. There's the Docker pull step probably doesn't look for specific tags, it probably just downloads the latest.
It does,
which is not what you want, because if you look at the syringe manifest, it's downloading the correct tagged version, and so what's going to happen is when you it's going to download all of the latest images before it starts self-medicate, and then once you start self-medicate and you interact with the lesson, it's going to then download that tagged version, which is going to be another download wait. So we're actually getting the worst of both worlds right now. Yeah, that's the problem. So that's an easy fix.
awesome.
Though. I think we already have the curriculum version in an environment variable, so we just got to wire it up.
Correct. So I'll work on wiring that variable in, pulling it from the curriculum. That shouldn't be difficult at all. Or pulling it from the manifest. You said manifest is where it's stored at?
I don't know. I'd have to look. I know it's at least there. I know it's at least represented there because you have to pass it into Syringe, so Syringe knows what to download. But it might
Okay.
not. There. I don't. I mean, there's probably not a way for us to. There's probably not a way for us to automatically use that value. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Okay. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
And then I still can't add reviewers on pull requests on Antidote Self-Medicate. I notice I can on proposals.
That's weird.
Yep. But we should look at getting some of the pull requests merged in, like the remove requirement for specific host name.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
I'm having to, when I added the image, the work that I'm doing now, I have to change it and then remember what to uncommit in order to push another merge request in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll get that fixed today.
Great. Thanks. And then I'm doing a rewrite of the self-medicate to handle the resumes as well as separating the antidote portion from the environment portion to help alleviate with the kind scripts.
Oh, sweet. Cool. All right. Anybody have anything else?
I think I'm good.
I should only have to add him as a collaborator, right? For him to add to request a review.
No, I actually I started this earlier and then I got distracted by the NRA Labs the new docs. But I was in the process of laying out new teams for GitHub so that we had space for like committers and things like that. I'm not quite finished, but I just added that team to the self-medicate repo.
Right.
And
I'm going to add Steve to that team.
no, he's already in it, so it's already done.
For self-medicate?
Yes.
Because he's now, well, I'm logged in right now and it doesn't show him. It only shows you in that team.
What team?
The self-medicate one.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Then I'm wrong. Go ahead and add him. I thought I added him.
Oh, I think he has to request to join.
Nope.
I mean, what are you clicking to add him?
We'll just go to the team. And
I'm there. You're on
a-
the left-hand side.
Yep, there's like a little plus icon. So there's my face, and then there's a little plus icon next to it.
Nope. Oh, because I'm not on the team.
Maybe that's it. This is what I'm talking about. It's not just creating this team. I need to revamp the entire. Like we still have like the original teams that like This isn't where it needs to be.
I can request to join, but I'll wait.
I can fix this one issue. That's fine. Seems like I have the ability to do that. Probably because I created the team. But anyway, there's a bigger task that needs to be done, which is to structure this, to structure the team layout that's now that mirrors what we laid out in the governance doc. So it's not just self-medicate committers. We need a committer team for every project, and then we need other teams and on all that kind of stuff. So try again, Stephen. If you should have the permissions you need now, but I'll sort of continue on this path of creating new teams that have the capabilities we need.
Okay, looks like I'm in there. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? I personally am in favor of just sitting here and listening to each other breathe, but maybe not everybody's into it.
I'm not. I'm gonna go.
All right.
All right.
Like,
Thanks,
to me,
everyone.
yeah, to me, I'm just setting up like all like a local instance of all the projects, and next what I plan on looking at is like MP1, like the database part. But yeah, right now I'm just setting up the projects.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, if there's anything you run into and you're like you find you're spinning your wheels with it, just post to the forums and let us know if we can help, because it's like I said, there's a lot of stuff in flux right now. So
Okay.
just
Okay.
reach out.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. Have a good rest of the week, everybody, and good Thanksgiving holiday for those that celebrate, and we will see you all next week.
Nice.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye.